The most famous government investigation into the UFO phenomena is undoubtedly Project Blue Book, far more famous than AARO has been recently, and an organization that, at least for a while, investigated far more cases than AARO has up to this point. Most ufologists and UFO aficionados look upon Project Blue Book as an enormous betrayal, years and years of investigation into a very genuine phenomena, a phenomena that to this day remains completely unexplained, and yet an effort made on the part of the government to tell the public that this was all much ado about nothing, that there was no reason to continue investigating the UFO phenomena because the objects that were being spotted in our skies and sometimes landing in front of witnesses and perhaps even allegedly kidnapping American citizens were the result of psychiatric problems, of hoaxes, and misidentified mundane objects. However, this was not always the case. Project Blue Book, at least for a time, was a very legitimate and unbiased organization led by a man who was undoubtedly a skeptic, but at the same time utterly determined to solve this mystery, even if the explanation was exotic and unbelievable. Project Blue Book followed in the footsteps of a couple of other government organizations that did not last very long and had some very different objectives. It started out with Project Sign, the first official United States Air Force UFO investigation that started in January of 1948. Its brief was to determine what UFOs were, but it only lasted until February of 1949, concluding that 20% of the cases that it examined were unexplainable. It was followed up by Project Grudge, which had a very specific objective. It was launched to denounce the UFO problem. Journalists were encouraged to write articles saying that UFOs didn't exist. The final report said that despite getting 23% more reports than Project Sign did, all sightings could be dismissed on psychological grounds and that any further investigation should be downgraded greatly, which it was. And Project Grudge was shut down in 1950. It came as a great surprise to me then when I discovered that Project Blue Book was a far more serious and unbiased investigation into the UFO phenomena than I ever thought. And in 1955, although Project Blue Book was still in operation at that time, its first leader, Ed Ruppelt, decided to publish his memoirs. Quote, "I felt I was in a position to be able to put together the complete account of the Air Force's struggle with the flying saucer. The report has been difficult to write because it involves something that doesn't officially exist. It is well known that ever since the first flying saucer was reported in June of 1947, the Air Force has officially said that there is no proof that such a thing as an interplanetary spaceship exists. But what is not well known is that this conclusion is far from being unanimous among the military and their scientific advisors because of one word, proof. So the UFO investigations continue. The hassle over the word proof boils down to one question. What constitutes proof? Does a UFO have to land at the river entrance to the Pentagon near the Joint Chiefs of Staff offices? Or is it proof when a ground radar station detects a UFO, sends a jet to intercept it, the jet pilot sees it and locks on with his radar only to have the UFO streak away at phenomenal speed? Is it proof when a jet pilot fires at a UFO and sticks to his story even when under the threat of court-martial? Does this constitute proof? The at times hotly debated answer to this question may be the answer to another question. Do the UFOs really exist? I'll give you the facts, all the facts. You decide. 5 years later, Mr. Ruppelt was dead of a heart attack at the age of 37. This is his story. In the summer of 1952, a United States Air Force F-86 jet interceptor shot at a flying saucer. This fact, like so many others that make up the full flying saucer story, has never before been told. I know the full story about flying saucers, and I know that it has never before been told because I organized and was chief of the Air Force Project Blue Book, the special project set up to investigate and analyze unidentified flying objects or UFO reports. There's a fighter base in the United States which I used to visit frequently because during 1951, 52, and 53, it got more than its share of good UFO reports. The commanding officer of the fighter group, a full colonel and command pilot, believed that UFOs were real. The colonel believed in UFOs because he had a lot of faith in his pilots, and they had chased UFOs in their F-86s. He had seen UFOs on the scopes of his radar sets, and he knew radar. The colonel's intelligence officer, a captain, didn't exactly believe that UFOs are real, but he did think that they warranted careful investigation. One day, the intelligence officer called me at my base in Dayton, Ohio. He wanted to know if I was planning to make a trip his way soon. When I told him I expected to be in his area in about a week, he asked me to be sure to look him up. When we got wind of a good story, Project Blue Book liked to start working on it at once, so I asked the intelligence officer to tell me what he had, but nothing doing. He didn't want to discuss it over the phone. When I left Dayton about a week later, I decided to go straight to the fighter base, planning to arrive there in mid-morning. But while I was changing airlines, my reservations got fouled up, and I was faced with waiting until evening to get to the base. I called the intelligence officer and told him about the mix-up. He told me to hang on right there, and he would fly over and pick me up in a T-33 jet. As soon as we were in the air, on the return trip, I called the intelligence officer on the interphone and asked him what was going on. What did he have? Why all the mystery? He tried to tell me, but the interphone wasn't working too well, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. Finally, he told me to wait until we returned to his office, and I could read the report myself. Once we were alone, the intelligence officer shut the door, went over to his safe, and dug out a big, thick report. It was the standard Air Force reporting form that is used for all intelligence reports, including UFO reports. The intelligence officer told me that this was the only existing copy. He said that he had been told to destroy all copies, but had saved one for me to read. With great curiosity, I took the report and started to read. About 10 o'clock in the morning, one day a few weeks before, a radar near the base had picked up an unidentified target. It was an odd target that came in very fast, about 700 miles an hour, and then slowed down to about 100 miles an hour. The radar showed that it was located northeast of the airfield over a sparsely settled area. Unfortunately, the radar station didn't have any height-finding equipment. The operators knew the direction of the target and its distance from the station, but they didn't know its altitude. They reported the target, and 2 F-86s were scrambled. The radar picked up the F-86s soon after they were airborne and had begun to direct them into the target when the target started to fade on the radar scope. At the time, several of the operators thought that this fade was caused by the target losing altitude rapidly and getting below the radar's beam. Some of the other operators thought that it was a high-flying target and that it was fading just because it was too high. In the debate which followed, the proponents of the high-flying theory won out, and the F-86s were told to go up to 40,000 feet. But before the aircraft could get to that altitude, the target had been completely lost. The F-86s continued to search the area at 40,000 feet but could see nothing. A few minutes later, the aircraft ground controller called the F-86s and told one to come down to 20,000 feet, the other to 5,000, and continue the search. The 2 jets made a quick letdown, with one pilot stopping at 20,000, the other heading for the deck. The second pilot, who was going down to 5,000 feet, was just beginning to pull out when he noticed a flash below and ahead of him. He flattened out his dive a little and headed towards the spot where he had seen the light. As he closed in, he suddenly noticed what he first thought was a weather balloon, but a few seconds later he realized that it couldn't be a balloon because it was staying ahead of him. Quite an achievement for a balloon, since he had built up a lot of speed in his dive and now was flying almost straight and level at 3,000 feet and was traveling at nearly Mach 1. Again, the pilot pushed the nose of the F-86 down and started after the object. He closed fairly fast until he came within an estimated 1,000 yards. Now he could get a good look at the object. Although it looked like a balloon from above, a closer view showed that it was definitely round and flat, saucer-shaped. The pilot described it as being like a donut without a hole. As his rate of closure began to drop off, the pilot knew that the object was picking up speed, but he pulled in behind it and started to follow. Now he was right on the deck. At about this time, the pilot began to get a little worried. What should he do? He tried to call his buddy who was flying above him somewhere in the area of 20,000 feet. He called 2 or 3 times but could get no answer. Next, he tried to call the ground controller, but he was too low for his radio to carry that far. Once more, he tried his buddy at 20,000 feet, and again, no luck. Incidentally, this is a very common thing with close encounters in the air. Malfunctioning equipment, malfunctioning communications and tracking systems. It's been happening ever since the early 1950s when this report came in. By now, he had been following the object for about 2 minutes, and during this time, it closed the gap between them to approximately 500 yards. But this was only momentary. Suddenly, the object began to pull away, slowly at first and then faster. The pilot, realizing he couldn't catch it, which, by the way, in the fastest interceptor the U.S. had at its disposal at that time, wondered what to do next. When the object traveled out to about 1,000 yards, the pilot finally made up his mind. It was like a David about to do battle with a Goliath, but he had to take a chance. Quickly charging his guns, he started shooting. And as promised, viewers, I shared some of this Patreon exclusive video with everybody just as a thank you for all of your support. If you would like to find out about the rest of the story, this is a half-hour video. And by the way, part 2 of this video is going to come out at the end of Alien Week. So got a lot of exclusive content coming on top of the 14 exclusive videos that are already in the Patreon library. And by the time this video is complete, it will be the first 1-hour video, if you combine parts 1 and 2, that I have ever created, and I think it will be well worth $3 a month, or $3 one time if you just want to join for a month. That's all it takes to be a part of the Patreon family. So if it's something you'd like to support, all the details are in the description. Oh, before I forget, one other thing. If you purchased a piece of merchandise, a shirt or a hoodie or something like that, and you're not a Patreon supporter, just send me a copy of the receipt. Send me a copy of the receipt email that you received from Sunline for the merchandise, and I'm going to give you a 1-month free membership for doing that, just as a thank you. And to everybody else, I hope this piqued your curiosity about Project Blue Book and the work of Ed Ruppelt. And until next time, stay angry about space.